Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the third episode of The Third Divide. My guest today is Isabella Mundy. She is going to talk about her unique experiences as a third culture kid. So, Isabella, why don't you take it away from here?
Well, I was born in Indiana in the US, and I spent my first 7 years there. In 2010, I moved to South Korea, and I lived there for 7 years at two different parts, at two different bases. I spent 3 years at Osan Air Base, which was in kind of the middle of Korea. I spent the other four in a slightly further down part. And that's where I lived the most. But I think the most influential spots were definitely in the Middle East, where I lived in Bahrain for 2 years. And then when I was about to graduate high school, I moved to Signella, which is in Italy.
All right, so you're kind of like a military kid.
I am a military kid.
That's pretty cool.
Mhm.
All right, so going from what was the hardest part? Was it moving from airbase to airbase, or was it from, Korea to Bahrain or Bahrain to Italy?
The hardest part was actually leaving kind of the whole international spot and coming back to the US for college. That was definitely the hardest part because every summer I would come back to visit family and I'd spend about a month here. And then coming back for college, it's kind of like I was kind of like walk like a top. Oh gosh, sorry. I could talk like a duck, walk like a duck, but I wasn't a duck. I didn't fit in. I didn't really click with anybody because I was different. So that was definitely the hardest part.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. So, did you find it a little easier in any one of those places? Was one place easier than the other to just readapt to, or just adapt to in general?
Honestly, I think the best place that I adapted to was in Italy because prior to going there, I totally branched out and I was like, I want to make connections before I get there. So by when I got there, I already knew people for like 6 months ahead of time. I had friends there. People showed me around before my school even started, before anything else started. So I already knew people before I got there, which definitely made it a lot easier.
Yeah. How did you get to know people before you moved there?
I had gone on an international trip to the International Student Leadership Institute and spent a week there with people from all over the world. And that way I got to meet people from Italy, which I didn't know I was necessarily moving there at that time. But it was more like I got to meet people. And then I was like, hey, I actually remember meeting someone from there. So then I reached out and I was like, hey, I'm moving there. And that definitely made it very easy.
Mhm. Which place did you stay in the longest?
Technically, South Korea.
South Korea.
Mhm.
All right. And because Italy was did you stay in Italy for long? Because you said that was the easiest place to live in.
I would have loved to stay in Italy longer. I could only stay there for 2 years because I went there at the end of my sophomore year and then I graduated. So while I could have probably stayed there for university, I did want to come back stateside.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So how did all of your experiences change your worldview?
Well, as a little kid originally, and I was told you're going to move from a small town in southern Indiana and you're going to go move to South Korea, I was kind of more focused on my friends' part. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll have a new experience to tell them about, and didn't really consider the whole change and the culture shock and everything. But mostly it was kind of just thinking about what I could do that kind of really helps.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's always easier when you do it a little younger because it's kind of like you think this is normal, like everyone does it.
Mm.
And so when you got back to the States, was there some sort of reverse culture shock that happened?
Oh, it was not a pleasant experience because I went in the summer, I'd stay with my grandparents. My mother and my father would come with me and we'd stay at my grandmother's. But then this time I'm doing it without them. So before I start college, I'm staying with my grandmother. And having to look out for my family was a bit different because usually you have the out of sight, out of mind. So I would like think about them time to time. It wasn't really having to worry about everybody. So instead of worrying about my two parents in Italy, and I now worrying about my parents in Italy, but also everyone around here. So it's definitely a bit of that. And then you also had like the whole you don't really fit in because you can't really relate. And that was just kind of more so because most of my family haven't left the United States. They've not really left their state in general. So I was definitely the odd one out.
All right. So do you feel like that first year of university or college helped you at all?
I would say it definitely did because like my roommate is from Arizona. She's never left the state and she was coming to Indiana University, which is in Indiana. And so the fact that she was still American and never left, but new to this situation kind of helps the whole, it's no longer like Americans, it's more like we. It kind of helps the divide of feeling like I wasn't in part of it.
Hmm. Yeah. And because of that, do you feel like it's kind of hard to explain life to somebody who hasn't necessarily had a similar experiences or has never even, like you said, has never even left the state?
It definitely gets difficult when they ask where are you from question
Oh yeah.
because you have so many different answers. And if you want to tell them your entire life about wherever you've lived, it gets to be a really long conversation. So it definitely was a bit more insightful, but it's definitely a bit weird because you have similarities, but you also kind of have a bit of a divide.
Hmm. So do you have a go-to answer for them? Like most of the time, most people don't really want to go through the whole ordeal of, yeah, well, I've lived there most of my life. I've also lived there, and then I moved over there. So do you have a go-to answer for them?
My go-to answer is usually I'm American, but I've not lived there since a kid. I live in Italy or I live wherever I was, just because that was like I am American. I was from here, but I no longer live here. And it's definitely a lot easier than being like, oh, I lived here and then I moved here and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you lived in Korea, Bahrain, and Italy. Was there one specific place that you felt like you interacted with a lot more cultures, or there was a lot more diversity in? Like let's say
Definitely in Bahrain.
Bahrain. Yeah, because you.
Because with Bahrain, you had a lot of different people there because it's like one of the smallest countries in the world.
Yeah.
But it had people from Pakistan, it had people from India, it had people from all kind of walks of life.
Mhm.
And it was definitely a different experience with like seeing Islam and all that kind of stuff. So it definitely was more engaging culturally.
Yeah, gotcha. And so before you moved to, or before you got into university, did you feel like your life didn't really have much stability?
The one thing about like I wasn't really necessarily a military kid. I was a military teacher's kid.
Hmm.
So I would stay in a spot. I could stay there from elementary school to high school, or like while all of my friends kind of moved out every 2 years. So that stability kind of didn't last. But the one nice thing was that my parents and my pets were always there in my house. While that changed, the people that were in it and things that were in it still stayed the same. So that was like the one stable thing that moved each country with me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And is there one specific place where you felt like you felt a foreigner in the most? Was there one place,
Definitely. Mhm.
was there one place that you felt at home more than another place?
Actually, the answer to both of those was Italy,
Hmm.
because when I first got there, I was just starting out in a new school. While I knew people, it still didn't feel like home because I absolutely adored Bahrain.
Hmm.
So when I got there, I was there for about like 6 months. And then, of course, COVID hit. So we went completely digital. I didn't see people for like 3 months. I couldn't leave my yard, that whole bit. So it was definitely harder to make that feel like home. But by the time I got near graduation, I definitely had my friend group. So that was kind of easier to have and made it harder to leave.
All right. And I think like the hardest part about being a TCK is you make all these connections in different places. I mean, some people make more connections than others, but for the most part, we all make connections everywhere. And then when we have to move, it's just a little harder that second time around. So have you ever felt like, your connections to one place have been confused or, you felt like you're connected more?
You definitely like with me when I graduated, my friends all kind of went to different spots. So while I felt connected to like Italy and Sicily as a place, I didn't really feel connected to people anymore because the people had left. So it was definitely
Okay.
kind of odd because I loved the memories there, but the people were no longer there.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And like this is kind of an odd questions, but did your experiences help you realize the importance of just living in the moment, just not really worrying about what's going to come next?
It definitely did because, as someone who has to move around a lot, you got used to adapting. And that was definitely a skill that I'm really happy I learned as a little kid because then it was just a lot easier to move. It was a lot easier to make connections with people. It was a lot easier to just be able to do anything because I was super adaptable.
Hmm. Hmm. And what are the benefits do you think you've gained after becoming a TCK, and what are the main challenges that you faced?
Well, the main challenge is definitely having the people move and you kind of lose friends, but you have to still stay connected, like through social medias or anything like that. The challenge is like also you move and then you have to readjust, you have to make new friends, but you also get a new house, you get kind of a new area. But the best part is all of it. You get to be in a new spot, you get to meet new people, you get to experience new situations that you really couldn't have thought of. And that's definitely something I appreciated because while I was overseas, I got to travel a lot. I've been to over 40 different countries and have people and connections in all of them. So there's definitely a plus side to being a military kid or a third culture kid and everything like that.
Yeah. And for some people, they feel like because they're going to move somewhere else, it's not really worth it to go out there and make any connections. Just stay closed off because they're just going to move somewhere else eventually. Can you relate to that at all?
I have definitely seen it like if I found like when I was moving to Bahrain, I was supposed to move at the beginning of the year, but eventually got pushed back to the middle of the year. And when I told my friends I was moving, you could definitely see that they were trying to detach
Hmm.
because that's kind of something you kind of adjust to because you find out someone leaving and you try to make it not hurt as much. So you
Yeah.
definitely see people either don't put themselves out there or very like used to being like, oh, you're moving. I will back away and I'll stay kind of closed off from you because I could get hurt from you.
Yeah. Yeah, I could totally relate to that. And so you mentioned about like you said how it wouldn't be the same necessarily to go live in that same place that you've lived in because the people are not the same. And yeah, I've been through that too. So like I kind of came like I'm a firm believer that being home is kind of like it's more of a people than a place.
Mhm.
A place has a big part to do with it, but I feel like it would be 70% people and then 30% the place. So
Definitely.
have you ever been confused about where your home really is? I mean, even now, like, you've lived in Korea, Italy, and Bahrain. So have you ever been confused about which one of those you belong in the most, maybe necessarily because you've spent more time there in one of those places?
Home is definitely a changing location almost all the time because like you move houses and that becomes home. But like for me, when I talk about the United States, we'd call that home, but we hadn't lived there in 11 years. So it's home because family's there, but the actual like our house that we had here, we sold a long time ago. So we didn't have like a house, we had people. So I think that definitely kind of changes your definition of home. And home kind of it took a while for me to say this new place I'm living in is home because I miss everything about the last place I for Sigonella in Sicily, I didn't call that home until I was about to graduate because I kept seeing flaws and I kept seeing issues. But once I kind of looked in the moment, I was like, I'm about to leave this place. And I kind of started seeing more things that I liked about it, more things I was going to miss. It made it easier to say and call it home.
All right, well, this brings us to the end of the episode. Isabella, thank you so much for coming on and thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
Thank you.